Hi, hello and welcome. A simple video, a simple question. Should you read In Therapy, or the title in English is Every Day Gets a Little Closer, a Twice Told Therapy by Irvin Yalom? The answer, not so simple. In short, maybe. Normally I like to start off these types of videos with a clear-cut answer to the question I ask, just so that I don't postpone it for the viewer and they get the information they were actually looking for. But with the answer maybe, I realize that you aren't all that much the wiser really. So you will have to stick around for the pros and cons, and I will try to conversate to you why I think the answer is neither yes, neither no. In short, this book is about a therapeutic process between Irvin Yalom, a client-centered therapist, and his client. Ginny Elkin is the pseudonym she uses as a writer. The book takes place in the 70s or the 80s, somewhere around there, so quite a while ago already. And the agreement between therapist and client is actually that all the therapy sessions provided are completely free, as long as Ginny, the client, agrees to write reports on every session they have together. Now, that client, Ginny, is an up-and-coming writer living in California. A large part of the book takes place in San Francisco, where Irvin Yalom has his therapy practice. And Ginny is, of course, faced with some problems, because otherwise people don't normally go to therapy. Her problems are mostly in the realm of some depressive complaints, maybe even a depressive disorder, and there's also some schizoid remarks in her story. Some of the subjects that Mr. Yalom tries to help her with throughout this book are her relational struggles with her partner Carl, her sex life, her problem to achieve an orgasm during sex, for example, and also on a larger scale her problem to communicate to her partner what is needed in bed for her to achieve that goal. Her self-esteem, she's constantly beating herself up, especially about her writing job or profession or hobby. She thinks that she's not good enough in that, even though Yalom really credits her with having a great writing skill and spirit. An underlying theme in the therapy is also the existential themes, for example finding meaning in life, having choice, having freedom. And then one of the main recurring themes, which is kind of unavoidable in most kinds of therapy in my opinion, is her regulation of emotions. Ginny gets flooded by them sometimes, and she fails to think rationally about the situations. She acts impulsively on her emotions, and that is not always the best fit for that situation. Now, to come back to the question, the main theme of this video, should you read it? Well, maybe. It's not a must read. Not for somebody that is interested in psychology, not for somebody that is interested in psychotherapy, but also not for the layperson that is interested in neither of them and just wants a good book to read. It's not something that you must have on your shelf or that is gonna really change up your life in spiritual or life-changing ways. For someone working in the field, as I am, I don't think it's really even gonna change up the way I work all that much. I'm very sorry, Mr. Yalom, even though you have a very nice head down there, I'm still gonna drag your book down through the mud a little bit. If you have time available and if you have a specific interest in the concept of therapy reports from both parties, from both involved sides of their confrontations, their communications, you should definitely give this book a try. I think you can get some nice insights out of it, that's for sure. It's not wasted time. But just as I said with my previous book review, the book by Alan Watts, it's time you might be able to spend better on other books or other types of information that you could consume. Now then, if the answer is only maybe, I can hear you asking, well then, why would I read it? If the answer is not a clear-cut yes, then well, why would I even bother? One of the main pros in this book for me was the afterword provided by Yalom. Afterword being this kind of extra chapter at the end of the book where the author kind of meta-communicates about the process of the book itself and about maybe the content, as Yalom does here. In that afterword, he really provides some insight into why he used certain therapy techniques, which were the actual frameworks that he used in his therapy, like the overarching schools of therapy that he implemented. And he writes about those things with a great insight and definitely a lot of knowledge about what he is doing. And it's a pleasure to read. But while browsing through some of the Goodreads reviews of this book, I stumbled upon the one by K, the user, with just the username K as a letter, which you can see right there in the orange, rectangle. Dr. Yalom's afterword was excellent, but I'm not sure it was worth slogging through the entire book to get to it. Slogging through those words, there's really like an impactful meaning behind them, huh? It really conveys this sense of really battling the book to get to the end. But if you do get to the end, the afterword is excellent. I don't completely agree with that user. I think slogging through is maybe a bit too visceral. I think it's not that bad in the slightest, but still. If you are in therapy yourself, this book might help you kind of compare your process to that of Ginny and really realize that the struggles that you might be experiencing in that relation with your therapist is something that is normal for a therapeutic process. It might help normalize some of the hardships, some of the obstacles you encounter along the way. For someone on the other side, on the therapist or psychologist side, like me, I think the book provides great insight, as I mentioned before already, into how you can combine multiple schools of thought, multiple therapy frameworks, for example, existential therapy, client-centered therapy, but also behavioral influences are clearly apparent in Yalom's work. He just shows you how you can combine all those things in a meaningful way, and he explains why and how he does it. Seeing how he can combine those therapeutic schools really gives me hope for the future. I am very doubtful about which school I would like to continue in, which school I would like to develop my skills further into. I definitely have an interest in the client-centered part and then especially the existential part, but there's also a big side of me that is interested in cognitive behavioral therapy and techniques, because it's so concrete, you know. They have these techniques that are proven to be effective. And in this book, Yalom just shows like, well, you don't have to make a choice. You can use something from every single part of therapy that there is to offer. And that's a beautiful message, I think, for people that are training to become therapists or psychologists. Don't look at the therapeutic landscape as having such strict boundaries between the different frameworks of thought. Just combine all of them. Find your own style. Find what works for you. Now, because Yalom is still a client-centered therapist, a lot of effort is put into the realization in the therapy relation of Rogers' basic client-centered values. Empathy, being real with each other. And thirdly, one of the most important ones in my opinion, unconditional positive acceptance. Letting everything exist. Accepting the person across from you as someone holistic, as a holistic concept. It's an entire human being with strengths and weaknesses, not just the weaknesses or not just the complaints or diagnoses that the person carries. Establishing that real connection is something that Yalom clearly takes a lot of time for, but it pays off. You can see the impact that it has on the techniques and methods he uses towards Ginny, but also on how Ginny sees him as a therapist. Those all sound like very positive things, so why is my answer not yes? Well, that is because of the cons listed here. The reports from the client side, from Ginny's point of view, are often filled to the brim with really vague language. There's all this idiosyncratic imagery in there, there are incoherent fragments, she jumps from one point to another, and sometimes she just uses so many analogies that don't immediately make sense to someone that was not right there in the session with them, and that makes it hard to read through her part of the story sometimes. There's some critique to be given to the therapist as well, though, in my opinion. The book was of course written a while back, so there were previous standards back then for how a therapist should behave towards a client, that's for sure, but his reports are often, in my opinion, really over-sexualized and written with too much confidence. He says things that he can't really know, like for example, oh, this was clearly an indication of Ginny falling in love with me and she is really idolizing me as a therapist, and I need to be careful that she doesn't ruin my marriage because she is so clearly in love with me. And I did not get that feeling at all from what happened in the session, actually. The overconfident part is him saying like, yeah, we did this in the session and it had this effect, and I am proud of myself for doing this because that was really helpful. Now, this point of critique is something that Yalom himself counters in his afterword, so slog through the book and go read that. The book can feel elongated, it can feel drawn out, it can get boring, but I think that is a great analogy for what therapy can be like if you let it keep going on for that long. The emphasis nowadays is of course also being put on shorter therapies with clients because they can be helped equally as good in like 16 sessions most of the time. We don't have to keep on giving therapy just for the sake of giving therapy. Monitor outcomes, see if your client is making progress, otherwise you need to adjust the way that you are giving therapy, but don't just stretch it out for the sake of being together or something like that. After a while, you're gonna have to realize that you have to let your client go. You have to let your client explore the world again and try to fit in some more with the tools that she or he got handed in the therapy. You cannot just keep holding their hand until the end of their life. Another way in which the book is a great analogy to actual therapy is the frustration that you might feel in some sections. Ginny keeps on coming back with the same problems. Yalom keeps on giving her the the same advice, and Ginny just doesn't seem to hear it. It goes into one ear and comes out of the other, and that's something that you will encounter in the work field later as well. Some patients just don't want to hear solutions. Giving solutions is also a big caveat in our field. Giving advice and solutions is often not that helpful to people, and that's not really what they want to hear, even though they might think so. Try to dial back to those client-centered values that Rogers talked about. Be empathic, be understanding, have an openness, and be real, be yourself, be authentic. The final con, but one of the biggest ones definitely, is that the book is dated. Some of the techniques are outdated. Yalom's idea of those techniques and of what the therapy is about and stuff are also a bit dated probably, or they could just be a product of his own style and his own experience. That's also possible, but still, there's probably some more contemporary literature that will strike your fancy. Should you read it? Maybe. I don't regret reading it. I don't feel like it's time wasted, but it's not a life changer and it doesn't impact the way that I'm gonna work later all that much. If you do read it, let me know what you think if you ever find the chance to do that. I would love to hear some feedback on the book, on the video, on my life choices. Please help me. I'm really spiraling into a negative. An interesting concept, but the execution could have been done a bit better. Thanks a lot for watching. Hope you enjoyed, hope you learned something from it, hope it helps you make your decision on which book you have to read next, and I will see you in the next one. Bye bye.